Good day. This is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Montreal, Canada on November 16th, 2025. This is the second part of a two-part report featuring Moscow-based correspondent John Helmer, a frequent guest on Reason to Resist. In the first part, recorded earlier today, John and I discussed a recent corruption scandal in Ukraine and matters related to the proxy war there. In this part, part two, we focus on a recent terrorist attack in India and its implications, which are quite serious for relations between India, Pakistan, and potentially the United States. Now, before we conclude our discussion today, I did want to ask you about something very important, which at least on its face is not related to the Ukraine war, but it's an extremely dangerous situation based on my limited understanding of what's happened. And that is there has been an apparent terrorist attack again in India in or near a place called the Red Fort. I believe it's inside New Delhi, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. And the reports are that 8 people were killed when a car bomb exploded in the Indian capital. And the police Indian police are apparently examining whether there are links to militant groups in the Kashmir with this terrorist attack. And happening in the context of a recent war between these two nuclear-powered states, Pakistan and India, this is obviously of great concern where this might all lead. Can you tell us what you know about all of this, John, in terms of like what have we learned from the reporting in India about this attack? And could you please talk to us also about the larger context of India-Pakistan relations and also, of course, the tensions between the United States and the Trump regime and the Indian government over its purchases of Russian oil and so forth? Where does this all fit in? Is there any relationship, in your opinion, at all between this attack and the tensions between the United States and India?
Yes, there are direct and indirect connections. Let me just try and quickly summarize what happened Monday a week ago in Delhi. A car that had been parked near the Red Fort, which is currently symbolizes in India the platform where the first declaration of first speech by the Prime Minister of India, Prime Minister Nehru, declared Indian independence, and has come to be the place where the National Independence Day speech is given. It symbolizes Indian independence, but it has a much longer history of Mughal Empire in Western India. The car had been parked for 3 hours out in this crowded area. When it moved off, started to move, a massive fireball was the result of a detonation of the explosive inside the car. And to the best of my knowledge, 3 individuals were killed. In addition, the death toll now of the passers-by, people unfortunately within the blast and fire impact of the explosion. The death toll is now 13. The best way that I can recommend our audience follow what exactly has happened is to look at NDTV, the Indian media channel. NDTV in India gives, in my view, a very accurate ball-by-ball, minute-by-minute account of what happened. What we know now is that the explosion was accidental. It was not a suicide bombing attack. It was accidental because the car had been filled with the explosive as a result of the Indian security services in the previous Saturday and Sunday rounding up large number of the leaders of Jaish-e-Mohammed, JEM, a Pakistan-directed, Pakistan-based terrorist organization. Because of the arrests over the weekend, and at the same time, during the arrests, a very large cache of explosives was found. Let's get it right. 30,000 kilograms of explosives were found. 30,000. That makes a lot of explosive material that was intended for attacks, which I'll come to in a minute. As you can see from the clip you've just put up, this is an unusual collection of arrests and identifications of JEM leaders. They're all doctors or highly university trained professionals, white collar terrorists this time round. One of the doctors was in the car that blew up. Now, those who've been arrested have obviously begun to indicate what the targets were. What I understand from my Indian sources is that what was planned was a massive set of simultaneous attacks, perhaps as many as 30 bombs going off simultaneously across India, attacking Hindu temples with the objective of triggering massive Hindu anger at Muslim communities, attacking Muslim mosques. In other words, this was a planned operation by JEM to trigger massive internal communal violence in India. The plan came from Pakistan. JEM is supported, based in Pakistan, and was one of the targets of Operation Sindoor, which was, as you referred to, Dimitri, the Indian retaliation for the attacks in Kashmir, the Pahalgam terrorist attacks, which cost the lives of 26 people in Kashmir. That led to the war between Pakistan and India. And I don't think we haven't the time to get into that. The important points are the general ones, which we come to now. It's not the first time there's been this kind of terrorist attack. It's the size of the explosive seized is so large, and the success of the Indian security forces in rounding up the leaders leads to a much greater appreciation of a couple of important things. First of all, after the war of April, May of this year, it would be to be expected, especially since President Trump claims the credit for achieving a ceasefire and a peace deal between India and Pakistan. It would be expected that the Pakistani military and intelligence services who run these terrorist organizations, run JEM, would have put the brakes on any future operational planning that they had already underway at the time of Operation Sindoor, the retaliation and the war which followed the Pahalgam Kashmir attacks. But no, there's been no Pakistani restraint. No Pakistani restraint. Why? I ask the question. All of us should be asking the question, because in Pakistan, and I know Pakistan from my own happy time in Lahore, and I used to report for Viewpoint of Lahore, a leading anti-military, independent democratic newspaper in Pakistan. My understanding is that Pakistanis believe that Trump has endorsed all of Pakistan's strategic hopes. Trump has received an elaborate luncheon. Field Marshal, he promoted himself after losing the war against India to Field Marshal. Asim Munir is the de facto leader of Pakistan and far exceeds in political power and military power the Prime Minister of the country, the elected leadership of the country. The relationship between Trump and Munir, the relationship between Munir and the Joint Chiefs of Staff in Washington, the relationship between Munir, the Saudis who finance, and the US military who implement a strategic doctrine of cooperation that has appeared to be the context in which this new terrorist plan of attack was uncovered in India. So let me come quickly, because we're getting to the limits of everybody's patience on a podcast, the big consequences here. First of all, go to NTTV and look at what the Indians have found out about this particular incident. Then we ask ourselves, what must India do in response? First, India will respond. Second, Prime Minister Modi has just won a very significant state election in Bihar. So I think we should conclude there is no political pressure to act on Prime Minister Modi. No political pressure. He has a reinforced popular mandate, which Modi delegates to the Indian military to decide what they will do in response. Now, without going into the extent of their response against Pakistan in Operation Sindoor in May, let's just focus now on two or three things of importance. The first thing is that Prime Minister Modi was intending to receive Russian President Vladimir Putin in Delhi on December the 6th, of a state visit of great importance because India and Russia are strategic allies, and a visit which had been originally anticipated in April. That visit was postponed, and it's possible, and we are on the verge of news breaking here, that Monday, Tuesday in Moscow, Foreign Minister Jaishankar, who will be representing India in a round of meetings of the Shanghai Cooperation Council in Moscow this coming week, it may happen that the Russian side and the Indian side will postpone Putin's visit because of the impending plan of Indian retaliation and military action to stop Pakistan's support for this level of escalated violence in India. Now, what the Indian military will decide is not something he's going to tell me, and I'm not going to say if I knew, but I need to convince everybody that it is very important we all understand that India and Pakistan are once again on the verge of a new war, which makes President Trump's so-called ceasefire absolutely empty when he announced it, and creates some very important questions. How far will the Trump administration go in supporting Pakistan's in planning, direction, financing, and arming JEM and other groups whose purpose is to trigger massive intercommunal violence in India? How far will the Americans go? Do we want to hear President Trump and J.D. Vance, who was involved in the so-called ceasefire negotiations before, will we hear from them that they do not support any form of Pakistan-directed terrorism against India? Messages of condolence from the US Embassy in Delhi for violence is not sufficient to convince either Indians or Pakistanis, that the Trump administration is not supportive of attempts to weaken India in this fashion. I'm not saying there's a direct connection between the Trump administration, the CIA, and the US military and what has happened. What I am saying is there's a strategic relationship now between the United States and Pakistan, in which the US sees Pakistan and Pakistan sees itself as a new fighting platform for US objectives to attack Iran to the west of Pakistan and Afghanistan. Now, in this particular long-term strategy, in which the US is repeating against Iran, against Afghanistan, against Russia, strategic doctrines which we all can remember from Zbigniew Brzezinski and Jimmy Carter's time. This is going to be contested in a completely new way by India. What has India's strategic interest here? First of all, India is thinking about, cutting Baluchistan off from Pakistan. And I won't get into the geography, we don't have time, but it's important that people understand another round of war will result in the significant reduction of Pakistan's territory in exactly the same way that US encouragement of Ukraine as a war platform against Russia is ending up cutting Ukraine to bits. Second, it's possible, and the relationship between the Indian military, the Indian intelligence services, the prime ministry, and so on, have to decide whether to remove Pakistan occupied Kashmir as a permanent source of terrorism, of war making against India, as this particular episode shows. That in turn would create, for the first time, an Indian corridor to Afghanistan and would open the airspace above Indian territory to connect Russia to India directly in a way that's not been possible before. So there are two major strategic objectives the Indian military are looking at now, which would directly challenge Pakistan's territorial integrity to the west of India, Pakistan's willingness under Field Marshal Munir to become a US platform for fighting US enemies like Iran and Afghanistan. And what we have is the first demonstrable illustration of how empty, deceptive, and foolish Trump's claims to achieve ceasefires and peacemaking in his list of 9. You've done a great job. Our audience understands and accepts the emptiness of Trump's so-called Gaza peace. That's one of the reasons you went to Nasrullah's funeral in Beirut, because the notion that the US stands for peace in the Middle East is a nonsense. It's a lie. Now we have a move that allows us to look at India and Pakistan, as we've been focusing on Israel, the United States, Iran, and Russia in previous programs. The world is just as hot, just as dangerous, and Trump's policies of so-called ceasefires and peacemaking just as phony. And it will take now a new demonstration by the Indian army of just how phony this is.
You know, I have to just remind our audience about this disgraceful display of flattery that Pakistan's prime minister engaged in Egypt when the so-called peace deal between Hamas and Israel was being celebrated And he was not only derided, the Pakistani prime minister, internationally, within his own country, quite understandably, there was a lot of revulsion at just how sycophantic he was with respect to Trump. And, it seems to me, John, that whatever the reality may be of, the Trump regime's involvement in this scheme, what you describe is extraordinarily destabilizing potentially to India, and would be obviously viewed by the Indian leadership, military, political, intelligence communities with the utmost seriousness.
Yes.
They would regard this as a grave, grave assault upon their own security. And you see this kind of display of sycophancy between Pakistan's prime minister and Trump. And you're bearing in mind that Trump is, being, for some months now, has been antagonistic towards India because of its relations with Russia. You've just got to suspect, if you're in their position, that the Trump regime knew about this and greenlighted it, if not actually facilitated this scheme. It's hard to believe, if you're sitting in their shoes, that the Pakistani prime minister, his government, did not in any way, shape, or form alert the Trump administration to its plans and get some kind of a green light. And whether or not that's true or not, I don't know. I'm in no position to say. You and I don't have, insight into the intricacies of the Pakistani-U.S. government relationship, but this certainly has to be a suspicion that is foremost in the minds of the leadership of India. And I guess my question to you is, how do you think this is going to impact U.S.-Indian relations in the months ahead? And I would imagine that it is certainly going to enhance, well, not certainly, but may well enhance India's incentive to strengthen its relationships with the other BRICS countries and distance itself even more from the United States. Where do you think this is all going to lead, John?
It's a good question, Dimitri, and you've put the right context. Bear in mind, there's a very large Indian diaspora currently sitting at the top of the Trump administration. Wives, the wife of the vice president is just one example. There are many examples. There are also Indian diaspora representatives now. The new mayor of New York is one. There's a very strong relationship between the diaspora and the homeland, and Prime Minister Modi cannot and will not alienate that diaspora and its aspirations and its welfare, and the degree to which that diaspora contributes to the welfare of families and communities at home. Second, Modi has been negotiating on a very friendly and cordial basis personally with Trump to achieve a tariff agreement that will preserve as much of the Indian trading relationship with the United States as is possible. At the same time, we're aware that the court challenges to the legality of Trump's use of trade tariffs is underway. So Prime Minister Modi has to be cautious and careful for Indian reasons and for trade reasons and economic reasons to go as gingerly as possible, but at the same time preserve Indian sovereignty. One of the sovereignty issues is the use by Trump of the secondary sanction threat against the sale of Russian oil through Lukoil and Rosneft to Indian refineries, to Turkish refineries, to Chinese consumers. We saw that during the meeting between President Trump and President Xi, there was no attempt by Trump to threaten China with the kind of threats that have been applied to India to stop buying Russian oil. In fact, we saw, and we've said it, Trump backed off the threat to China, and clearly doesn't intend to enforce the Rosneft-Lukoil sanctions when oil purchases and oil trade is conducted between Russia and China. Whether and for how long India will accept the US threat on oil trade as an infringement of its sovereignty, but as a tactical, temporary expedient to preserve its negotiating standing with Trump, I don't know. This is going to work itself out in the coming weeks. This terrorist attack by JEM and the extent to which the bigger plan of massive intercommunal violence that JEM was planning, how far this will produce an Indian strategic military response that will complicate, delay, or defer the trade relationship, I don't know yet. We're laying out how the markers look on the board. We don't know exactly how they will be moved. What we can say is that, and we're just repeating ourselves, Trump notion of compelling countries like India, like China, like North Korea, like Venezuela, like Iran, to comply with US strategic ambitions, this is being tested all the time. And what we're seeing is fight back.
Well, John, always very enlightening and enjoyable to speak with you. I look forward to our next discussion. We've been going for quite some time here, 90 minutes, so we're going to call it a day. And we're coming to you from Montreal, Canada on November 16th, 2025.